Not many creators do that, and actually I think Caroline's probably the first creator I've actively seen do that in the home workout space. I guess the big question on everybody's lips at the moment seems to be, where is Caroline? And I know what you're thinking, Harry, it's a bit of an odd video to make, and I'm making it for a few reasons. It's going to be slightly different to previous videos. The first half is going to be kind of discussing what's could be occurring and the realities of content creation and some other few bits and bobs largely mental health related, and the second half is going to be discussing a workout, but we'll get to that shortly. Essentially what's been happening is obviously I've done a few videos on Caroline in the past. As you know, I'm a big fan of her and her workouts. I think she's probably one of my preferred home workout creators, and I've had a lot of DMs, a lot more than you might think, and I've also had quite a few comments, people asking, where is Caroline? Harry, do you know when she's releasing her next program? And all these bits and bobs. And that's kind of encouraged this video because there are a few things I want to very quickly discuss. But obviously, very quickly before we crack on with the video, I'm going to do the bits and bobs that need to be done. If at any point you decide you like the video, please let me know you like the video by dropping a like on the video. 1,300 likes is the goal. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, or maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, then please do consider dropping it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Obviously, spooky season is upon us, therefore the headwear this month will reflect that. Oh, it's kind of just in frame. That's bloody perfect. It doesn't wobble as nearly as much as I thought it did. So the thing is, obviously a lot of people have, like I said, have been asking me where Caroline is, but there are a few things we need to consider when asking that question. Like if we go on her channel, we can see it's been about 2 months since she last uploaded a video, and that was a Q&A. Previously, she obviously did her Fuel series, and before that, I believe it was the Iron series. The thing to remember is that Caroline creates a lot of free content. Obviously, it's free in the sense that you don't have to pay for it. Flip around, YouTube ad revenue will be paying her for these videos, so she will be making likely thousands of dollars per video she creates just from YouTube alone, but you yourself as a consumer don't have to pay for it. And creating content does actually probably take a lot more time than many people think. It is not as easy as just kind of sitting up and filming a video. You do have to plan and prepare what you say, because whatever you say is subject to criticism and scrutiny, and it is also going out in the public, which is one of the things I've kind of brought up before with influencers or content creators, where they kind of speak without thinking to an extent, and then they end up saying something that is largely incorrect or potentially misinformation, which goes out to the public for people to believe and use. And the thing, especially with the kind of home workout side of things, where at home you're always going to be to some extent limited to what you can do. Caroline is in a bit of a tricky situation because she's creating content, creating loads of different workouts, but she's largely probably trying not to repeat too many of the same exercises, too many of the same variations, all that kind of stuff, which again, arguably may not be optimal, because in a lot of cases optimal programming is actually quite boring, not a lot of things change. But for home workouts where there's a lot more variation involved, it becomes increasingly difficult to, when you've already included most of the variations. So that's definitely a consideration, is that to keep it fun, to keep it exciting, and to keep it enjoyable and sustainable for you, she probably has to really kind of knuckle down and think about what she could do differently every week or every video, which it is a lot easier said than done. One can assume that there may be a few reasons for her hiatus. She may actually be filming and preparing a new workout series as we speak. That, I think that's a fair likelihood, especially considering we're now in October. Maybe she'll do a pre-Christmas workout routine, I'm unsure. Another thing to also consider is maybe she's dealing with something in her personal life. Maybe she's got other things and other priorities right now. Maybe we should be patient with her and give her time so she's able to overcome what she may be potentially dealing with. Also, she's able to better invest her energy into creating a new workout series, who knows? And that kind of goes into the realm of like the mental health side of content creation. It's like I said, when you have all this pressure to create content that has to be different all the time, it can take a toll. And the reality is being online, creating videos is really cool externally. It's a really cool thing to do. And I will admit, as someone who does this, it's not my full-time job, but it's something I do, and I do get some money from YouTube. It is really cool, and it's such a privilege to be able to do it. But it does also feel a bit isolated at times. And it also opens you up to a world of pressure and scrutiny that you necessarily weren't expecting to be opened up to. So whatever you say, whatever you do online, someone is always going to say something. And sometimes those comments can be quite negative, and sometimes those comments can actually be quite hurtful, which is why I ensure that when I am analysing or discussing somebody's workouts or whatever they're doing or videos, that I'm always polite, I'm always kind, and I always try and find positives in there as well as constructive criticism, because I don't want my content to ever be perceived as negative. I don't want my content to ever potentially negatively impact the mental health of a creator I'm talking about. Burnout is a very real thing, especially when Caroline puts in so much hard work to create these kind of workout series. I wouldn't be surprised if burnout is a factor that many people may not have considered. Your brain feels fried. No matter how much you know and no matter how many workouts you can create off the top of your head, it's almost like you just stop producing thought. Then you end up forcing yourself, or trying to force yourself to, you end up creating something you aren't very happy with. You end up then resenting it and binning it, and you end up in that endless cycle and loop where you just aren't satisfied because you just can't get it right. Maybe due to actually could be taking a break and just saying, you know what, mental reset is required here, let's go again soon. There are so many things, again, I'm merely speculating. I don't know, I'm just saying these are things that a lot of people might not have considered that could be a reality. And when you also get loads of DMs and loads of comments asking where she is, as I have seen in her videos, a lot of people asking where she is, that could potentially be adding to the pressure. I know a lot of you are really keen for her to release a new workout, and I'm probably quite concerned about where she is. Sometimes I do think giving somebody some time and being patient can go a really long way. To some extent, I've had kind of similar, I would say burnout experiences, but almost like mental dips with YouTube, where I felt like I wasn't creating good enough content. I still feel like that now. I felt like my channel growth wasn't very good, which then to me reflected my worth and my quality, and it led me to nearly quit YouTube on multiple occasions. And I've mentioned this before, is that before TFNL and the YouTube channel started growing again, I want to say end of March last year, I was on the cusp of quitting. As in, I was really thinking about it. I kind of had this idea of I probably had a few more weeks left before I was going to quit. Then one video I did on Daisy Keach did quite well. Then YouTube said, actually, you know what, we're going to favour you for a little bit and push me into the algorithm. And because of that, that reignited the fire and also redirected my content. So I started creating content that was hopefully simplified, hopefully educational, but also hopefully entertaining as well. Granted, we're going through a bit of a slump now. It has slowed down a lot. A lot of people who do choose to watch my videos are choosing not to subscribe, which is fair enough. I will never force you to subscribe. Just know that is always appreciated if you do. But I also understand that dips are part of the process. You know, progress is not linear. Sometimes there are downs, sometimes there are ups. Sometimes there are a lot of ups, sometimes there are a lot of downs. It's just about sticking at it, because eventually, if you give up, you never get to see the outcome. If you keep going with it, eventually you probably will. I know a lot of you probably rely on Caroline's workouts and her series for your home workouts, but there are other creators out there that you could consider. Sydney is a big one I actually compared Caroline to a couple of months ago. You've got Hella Robertson, you've got loads of people out there. That being said, if you don't want to do anybody else's workouts, you don't have to. You can actually repeat some of Caroline's previous series if you haven't already. And that's actually going to kind of go on to the next part of the video. If you are looking to repeat some of Caroline's previous series, which series would I probably recommend? I haven't seen all of her videos, but I've seen some of each of her series. Out of the series I have seen, my personal favourite, because it's very much resistance based, is her Iron series, which is not the one she did recently, but the one before that. And if you are considering repeating a series, I'd definitely consider repeating this one. And while we're here, we're actually going to have a look at her day one of the series, which is the most popular video in this series, which is a 30-minute leg workout, dumbbell leg day. So we're going to skip through the intro and all the bits and bobs because a lot of you probably have seen it already. I've kind of waffled on enough. I feel like we need to get into the more informative and educational content now, which is exactly what we're going to do. The way through is obviously it's a lower body day. Therefore, it's going to target the lower body muscles. So you think about the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes, etc, etc. The thing I like about the series is she typically splits the exercises, so it's one exercise, rest, another exercise, rest, another exercise, rest, rather than mix and matching loads of different supersets, etc, etc. When looking at hypertrophy and the concepts of muscle building, which is the kind of primary focus of this series, that is something I would definitely favour. Although arguably your heart rate may not be as elevated, you may not necessarily feel you might be working as hard due to not moving as much. When it comes to building muscle, it's likely going to be more effective than a lot of her other series. So right now we're actually looking at a suitcase squat, which is a movement I've never actually spoken about on this channel as far as I'm aware. And the big thing you'll notice here is Caroline is trying to keep the dumbbells close to her body. Obviously, the further away the dumbbells are from your body, the heavier they're going to feel and the harder they're going to be to hold. She's going down with a neutral spine. She's going down nice and low. When you're doing any kind of quad dominant movement like this is, depth is going to be key here because the quads really respond very well to that stretch at the bottom, which is what we consider stretch mediated hypertrophy. So lengthened position dominant movements. And squat variations will typically be more lengthened position dominant. So getting that depth is going to be really important, and you will be surprised how much more progress you make squatting as low as you can go versus half squatting. So again, if you can, try and get your dumbbells almost to the floor, just like Caroline is doing, and really milk that range of motion. If you have a few ankle mobility limitations and you want to make it a bit easier to hit depth, you can consider putting a plate or something similar underneath your heel, maybe a book perhaps, underneath your heels to elevate the heels about 3/4 of an inch or so, which will allow your knees to travel forward a bit more freely and should allow you to achieve greater knee flexion, therefore greater depth and greater quad stretch. But the movement itself I think is a good one. There are obviously a few limitations to consider. Is could your grip give out first? So don't be afraid to use straps, because that essentially reduces the impact of grip here. You see Caroline is doing her 60-second of exercise, resting and then go back to that same exercise. Great format. Again, with rest, I would always say rest as long as you need to. That's very much depend on the individual. So the next movement is going to be a static lunge. This is going to bring a bit more, obviously the quads are still going to be heavily involved here, but it's going to bring a bit more of the glutes into it as well, which is always a good time. You see Caroline's adopting quite a wide stance. You may not be able to go as wide, which is fine. You can always go a bit narrow if you need to. And if you want to make this potentially even harder and maybe even better for the quads and the glutes, don't be afraid to elevate that back foot 6 to 8 inches or so if you can, maybe on like a shelf or a few books or something similar. You'll be surprised. It turns it into a split squat, and that's bloody hard, and you know how I feel about split squats. Big thing here is the dumbbells aren't in front of her. They're kind of side on, resting on her shoulders. Again, there are considerations that the core might become a limiting factor, but if they were going to be here, it would be more of a limiting factor, so having them here is probably her best bet. Another consideration is having the dumbbells down by her side. That's probably what I would favour personally, but that's just my personal preference. But the other thing that I actually really like here, and I mentioned this I think in the last video, is Caroline's actually resting between sides rather than going straight into it. And I kind of touched on this as to why that's important, because obviously your breathing hasn't recovered. There's a consideration that you might be potentially recruiting weaker motor units if you go straight into the other side. Resting between sides is definitely advised. Great shout from Caroline. Not many creators do that, and actually I think Caroline's probably the first creator I've actively seen do that in the home workout space. So seeing her do that I think is bloody fantastic, and I really am happy to see it. So now we're going on to more of the hamstrings and glutes here. We've kind of ticked all the boxes already, where we're looking at a dumbbell RDL, and I've kind of mentioned this before. So the dumbbell RDL is a hip hinge movement. So the key there is hinge at the hips. Range of motion is very much individual here. You go as low as you can go, and that could be dependent on arm length, that could be dependent on leg length, that could be dependent on so many things. If you've got long legs, you might not be able to go as low. If you've got long arms, it might look like you're going lower than you actually are. So you hinge back, hinge back, hinge back, but you see Caroline about just under her knee, she no longer hinges back, she ends up just going down with the weight. That's typically where I would stop, and I've mentioned this before. As it's a hip hinge movement, the hinge is key. When you can no longer hinge back and you end up just going down, as Caroline is kind of towards the second half of this rep, you reduce the emphasis being placed on the glutes and the hamstrings, which are the priority, and you actually place a bit more emphasis on the lower back muscles, so the erectors, and that's probably not preferred. What I would typically do is kick your bum back as if you're going to hit the wall behind you. See how far you can get your bum back, and once your bum can no longer go back and you end up just going down as Caroline is there, cool range of motion there, slight pause at the bottom and come back up. If your legs are straighter, it'll typically be a bit more hamstring dominant. If your knees are more bent and you can probably kick your bum back a bit further, it might end up being a bit more glute dominant. So you can actually play around with this movement to make it bias either the hamstrings or glutes more, depending on what your goals are, which is fantastic. But again, I'd say it's a staple movement. I'm glad Caroline's included it. It's probably one of the best hamstring and glute builders out there. Whether you're doing it at home or the gym, I think it's a bloody good time. So we've now got a rear step lunge. Again, what I would probably do, because now we've had 2 lunge variations, I would have swapped the initial lunge for more of a split squat variation, and then maybe kept this in as a lunge variation. Personally, I prefer things like walking lunges, but again, you can't really do that at home because I don't know how big your house is. You might be able to. The big thing to consider, as Caroline mentioned at the start on her tips, is get that knee as close to the floor as you possibly can so we can really milk that range of motion. And also focus on evenly distributing the weight across your midfoot. So think about big toe, little toe and heel into the floor. We don't want you tipping back and forward, side to side with the foot. Try and really evenly distribute, and that will help you maintain more of a vertical shin angle, as Caroline is doing here on the way down. All good stuff I love to see. Again, resting between sides. Great to see that. I think that's bloody perfect. So next we have a goblet squat. Again, the goblet squat is something I have mentioned before that I'm not a massive fan of, because again, it's an anterior loaded movement. Your shoulders and or core will likely go out long before your quads do. The only kind of real advantage of a goblet squat in this situation at home is the fact that people typically find it easier to hit depth on a goblet squat and maintain a more upright torso when doing so. Again, I would definitely consider bringing the feet in a little bit, turning them out and maybe elevating the heels to get even lower. I like how she's pausing at the bottom. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the quads really liking that lengthened and like bottom position of squats. Pausing in that favored position is only going to do good. Big fan of that, I like that. But like I said, goblet squats are typically one of my least favorite lower body movements. In the context of a home workout, I actually do understand their place a bit more because you are a bit more limited. You don't have access to the other machines that I might have replaced goblet squats with. So for this case, I do understand. Considering you can only do so much, I don't think it's necessarily a bad time. Again, another anterior loaded movement here where the dumbbell's in front of you, again, brings in the consideration of could your core give out first instead of your quads, your glutes, or any other lower body muscles. Again, the range of motion will limit the quad involvement because we're not going particularly deep, but the glutes may take over a bit more, which is not a bad thing. I like this, the fact that Caroline's now dropped the weight from her down to the hanging position. That's much better. That does reduce the involvement of the core to an extent, although arguably it may involve the lower back a bit more, but I don't think that's as much of a concern here. Caroline also mentioned try not to round at the upper back. That's a big yes. Flat back / neutral spine is what we're always going to shoot for. But I think the lateral lunge is fine. Caroline's probably included it more, so she's working through a slightly different range of motion rather than just doing everything like forward and back. She's going side to side a bit more. Keeps things a bit interesting, keeps things a bit more exciting. I have to remember that home workouts will always have limited equipment access, so I need to keep that in my thoughts and as a consideration when I am analysing these workouts. So the last thing we have now is Caroline's finisher, which is a kind of a goblet squat or squat complex, I should say, where she's doing a half rep goblet squats, straight into full range of motion goblet squats, then into half rep body weight squats. Then I believe it says she goes into body weight full range afterwards. So again, it's very much a quad dominant workout finisher, and again, this will promote a lot of burning. Again, I've kind of already previously mentioned my concerns about like goblet squats and my thoughts and opinions on them. I don't want to discuss finishers too much right now because it's actually very relevant to comment question of the week, which we're about to get into. But that's it. That is the video done. And I think the thing is, considering Caroline's obviously limited equipment, she's done a dumbbell only workout. She's targeted the quads pretty effectively. She's targeted the hamstrings pretty effectively. She's targeted the glutes pretty effectively. She's ticked all of the boxes I would want someone to tick from a home leg day workout. She also hasn't really placed a lot of emphasis on the calves, but again, personally, I don't think that's much of a concern. I think if you want to do calves, you certainly can, in which you would just do standing calf raises with dumbbells in hand. Fine variation, but I don't think it's a necessity. I think quads, glutes, and hamstrings, especially for workouts like this, are much more of a consideration, much more of a priority. That's exactly why I'm a big fan of the Iron series, exactly why I'm a big fan of Caroline, to be honest, exactly why I think if you are struggling for finding home workouts to do and are waiting for Caroline's next series to inevitably drop at some point, I do think if you're going to look at any of them, depending on what your goals are, obviously, my preferred one would be the Iron series. If you've already done it before, that's fine, you can do it again, but this time, try and do a bit more. Try and lift heavier weights than you did last time. And when you do workouts, track the reps you do in the time period you're given, and the next time you do a similar movement in like a later workout of the series, try and do more reps in that same time, because that way you can track progressive overload from both a load, so weight used standpoint, but also number of reps performed standpoint. And now you've essentially gone through an effective lower body home workout, and you've also incorporated progressive overload, which is only going to help you achieve even better results than you achieved the first time. So it's mad. You can do this again, but you can do it even better than you did before and experience even better gains. To me, that sounds like a win-win. And I would definitely recommend, again, like I said, depending on goals, people do consider doing the Iron series for the first time if they haven't already, or maybe even repeating it and maybe doing even more than they did last time if they have already done it. It's a big win, and I'm sure Caroline will produce something even better soon. But now that's it. We're going to very quickly crack on with comment question of the week, and I did allude to this earlier with the finisher discussion. How do you feel about workout finishers? I'm doing a program right now that is utilising workout finishers, but I'm not sure how I feel about them. I think, to put it kind of simply, it's very much time and a place. I think sometimes workout finishers can have like quite a good place, but again, it depends what the finisher is. If it's like your last exercise of a leg day, and instead of doing 2 sets to 8 to 12 reps as you would normally, you maybe do 1 set of leg extensions followed by 1 set of sissy squats, like a superset shortened to lengthened position for the quads, as like a workout finisher, I think that's a pretty effective means and a pretty effective one to do. If it's just a random selection of exercises thrown into the mix to bring your heart rate up, to make you feel like that boost in heart rate towards the end of the workout meant the whole of the workout was more effective, I probably don't necessarily align with it. Again, it's also depending on your goals. Like if you're looking at muscle building, the finishers will have to look different. If you're looking at cardiovascular or maybe just heart rate elevation, then again, the finishers will probably have to look different. So it might be targeting muscles in different positions for the muscle building finisher, but then elevating the heart rate for the heart rate elevation or aerobic finisher. So the short answer is I guess it depends. Yes, I think they can be good depending on what the finisher is, and also depending on what your goals are. No, they aren't necessary, and sometimes they aren't necessarily good. So it really does depend. I think, like I said, if they're utilized well and implemented properly and thought about, I think they can be solid. But if they're kind of just thrown in there randomly to make you feel like you're working harder than you actually are, or to make you feel like the workout's been more successful or effective than it actually was, probably not so good. That is it. That is the video. Like I said at the start of the video, if you do like the video, please let me know you like the video by liking the video. 1,300 likes is the goal, so if we reach that, it'd be bloody splendid. It would be very much appreciated. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below to subscribe to the channel, maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you too have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, then please do consider dropping it down below in the comment section for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating the start of Halloween headwear season, and thank you for tolerating the video.